Good afternoon. This public meeting of the Finance and Member Participant Services Committee is being held at 30 North 3rd Street, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. By participating in this session, you are consenting to the recording, retention, and future viewing of this meeting. Although being live streamed via the internet, this meeting is a live in-person meeting open to the public in accordance with the Sunshine Act. The live streaming of this meeting is presented as a convenience and is not provided as the official means for public attendance. In the event the live stream fails or cannot be transmitted for any reason, the in-person public meeting will continue without interruption. Please proceed with the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to call this meeting of the Finance and Member and Participant Services Committee meeting to order and ask that Brenda take the roll, please.
Sorry, I had to do a little stretch there. Okay, Mr. Enders.
Present.
Representative Frankel.
Here.
Mr. Galeska.
Here.
Thank you. Senator Robinson or designee?
Stephanie Buchanan on behalf of Senator Robinson.
Thank you. And Secretary Spiker or designee?
Jeff Soderstedt on behalf of Secretary Spiker.
Thank you.
Thank you. First order of business is approval of the minutes of July 22nd, 2025. I move it. I need a second.
Second.
So moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, members. There is no old business, and I'm going to turn it over to Sarah to introduce the first order of business, which is a special presentation on stress testing and risk in the risk management report from GRS Consulting. Sarah.
Okay, so we're waiting on our actuaries. They are here. They're on their way. They'll make an entrance in here, but I'll just take a minute to introduce and sort of update the committee on a current event. You'll see Craig Graby come in. You're used to seeing him present as part of Korn Ferry. You're also going to see Chris Seitz come to present. You've seen him before a few years ago. He worked at Korn Ferry and he was on our engagement. But in June, Korn Ferry and Gabriel Roeder Smith, GRS, finalized an agreement to transfer pension actuarial responsibilities from Korn Ferry to GRS. SERS was promptly informed, and legal counsel representing SERS, Korn Ferry, and GRS collaborated to establish the terms of the transition. As a result, the existing SERS contract with Korn Ferry was officially assigned to GRS effective July 17th, 2025. Throughout the transition, actuarial services continue seamlessly, ensuring uninterrupted support for SERS. So as you can see, Craig is here. You're very familiar with Craig. We're happy to have him convert over with our contract to GRS. And you should, Chris should look like a familiar face to most of you that have been on the board a few years ago. Chris worked at Korn Ferry and now he works at GRS, and we're happy to have him back on our account. We had a very good working relationship in the past. So with that being said, if there's any questions, feel free to ask. If not, I'm going to turn it over to Chris and Craig to proceed with the stress testing and risk assessment report.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Yes, I'm Chris Seitz with Gabriel Roeder Smith & Company, and we're going to go over the stress testing report this afternoon. So one of the main things that we do as actuaries for the system is the annual evaluation. So as of each 1/1, we look at the assets within the trust, and we look at all of the membership data, and we try to estimate the value of all the benefits that will be paid from the trust. In order to do that, we need to make a lot of assumptions and expectations about what will happen in the future, how long employees will work, when they'll begin retirement, how long the benefits will be paid in retirement. And that helps us come up with that expected value, and from there, develop the employer contribution rates to pay into the system. What we're covering today with the stress testing is, well, what happens, what's the effect on the system, on the funded ratio, on the contribution requirements for when things differ from what we expect. So we have this expectation, and now this is a set of scenarios to help measure what would happen if our expectations are not met. So if we can flip forward to page 4. Again, this is just these what-if scenarios. So what if one thing happens? What is going to be the effect on the contribution requirements? What's going to be the effect on the plan and the funded system? If we move to page 5. You will see here, if we compare the results of these scenarios to the scenarios that were provided last year, you will see that the projections are slightly less favorable than they were last year. The main reason for that is because reflected within these scenarios are the effects of the updated changes in the assumptions that were presented to the committee in July. So that was the experience study that Craig had presented. And those assumptions will be reflected for the first time in the upcoming 12/31/2025 valuation to be applied to contribution rates beginning July 1, 2026. So those new assumptions that will be applied in the next fiscal year are reflected within this. That's the main reason why you see things being slightly less favorable. We move to page 6. Some common terms that you will see used throughout these scenarios are the ADC, the actually determined contribution. That is the amount that we calculate that is then converted into the contribution rates for the employers. The funded ratio, of course, just taking the actual value, the smooth value of assets as compared to the expected value of the benefits, the liabilities. And then the baseline. So with each scenario, we will also present the baseline, which is using our current expectations, reflecting the new assumptions from the experience study. And you will see throughout all of the scenarios, the baseline in the graphical representations will be a black line, and then any favorable scenario, so something that would be more favorable than our baseline assumption, is represented in blue, and unfavorable being represented in red. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Craig to give an overview of the types of scenarios that were analyzed.
Sounds great. Thank you, Chris. At any time, any questions, any comments, please feel free to interrupt. I'm happy to answer them now or at the end, whatever you prefer. We'll go to slide 8, and this just gives you a high level. The report itself has 3 main sections where we talk about investment risk, and I'll get into more detail about what each of these are in the next slides, but a demographic risk and then a contribution and governance risk. If we go to the next slide, we get more detail on the investment risk. So we're looking at generally, how do your investments line up? We're creating scenarios that kind of stress that negative 20% returns, whatever it might be, long-term, sustained losses or gains. So in 2.1, we're looking at a plus or minus 2%. So if your investment return assumption is currently 6.875%, what if you earned 4.875%? Or what if you earned 8.875%? And how does that impact your contribution and your funded ratio over time? If you're getting an extra 2 percentage points per year, things are going to be great. Your funded ratio is going to go up, your contributions are going to go down. But if you have a shortfall in every year, then you're going to have to contribute more through the actuarially determined contribution, and your funded ratio is going to be going down, and it probably levels off. The nice thing you'll see a little later is as you make your ADC, you make that contribution, you kind of stabilize that funded ratio. So it really is, it drives home the point of, even if it's a bad situation, keep making the contributions that we tell you to make, because it will help you kind of weather that storm and ultimately get back to a solid funded ratio. So also we're looking at 2.2, we're looking at what if the plan had a negative 20% return. So you're supposed to get 6.875%, you get negative 20, so you've lost 26.875%. How does that flow through and impact the contributions and the funded ratio? Liquidity, we're looking at how much you have in liquid assets, and we are saying, okay, if you have 3 consecutive negative 16% returns, are you still going to have enough to pay benefits for a certain period of time? And at that negative 16% for 3 years, you still have sufficient assets. You're liquid enough to pay the benefit payments for a specific period of time. Again, there's more details of each of these in the report, and we're just going to touch on 3 of them a little bit later. The stochastic simulation is one I always find entertaining. So from RVK, they provide us with 5,000 20-year investment performance projections. So we're getting 100,000 investment returns, and we're taking each of those 5,000 20-year returns, and we're putting it into our model, and we're saying, tell us over this 20-year period, where does the contribution go over time? Where does the funded ratio go over time? And then we put all those year by year together, and we put them into percentiles, the 95th percentile being a bad, very, very bad, 75th being, bad, but still within that, maybe a more likely range, 25 being a likely range of good, kind of the lower range of that, and then the 5% being the very unlikely range of amazing returns. So we'll see that later because that tends to be a more interesting example to see. And then finally, what if you change your investment return assumption permanently and you had, if you went down to 4.875%? Again, these are scenarios just to see how they impact things. It's not likely that you would go that low, or even down to 5.875%, which we also show information on, or up to 7.875%. I know we hope the returns are going to be well above 7%, but we're not ready to recommend that you increase your assumption at this time. Section 3, we just go into two main categories. We're looking at mortality. So what if your mortality is 10% higher or 10% lower? Now, we're not talking 10 percentage points. So if it was a 1% chance that you die, we're going to make it a 1.1% chance that you die, or a 0.9% chance that you die. So we take each of the rates over a 10-year period, and it mainly is going to affect your retirees who are in pay status. And how does that higher or lower mortality impact the funding over that period, over the 10 years that's in play, and then the subsequent 10 years after that, where you can kind of make up the difference, either recognize the gains you see or make up the losses. And then for salary, we're doing something similar. We're saying 10 years of salary increases, 2 percentage points above expectations or 2 percentage points below expectations. Finally, the section 4 is contribution and governance, where by law, the ADC has to be contributed. You can't contribute something lower, but we want you to see, what is the risk of making something less than the required, the actuarially determined contribution. So in the first one, we cap it. We say you're not going to make a contribution in year one. You're making 20%, then 40, 60, 80, and then getting back to 100%. And how does that impact your funded ratio and your future contributions? Another one we're looking at in 4.2 is we assume you're going to earn 4.875% for 20 years, and then we're going to collar your contributions at what we estimate to be about a budget percentage increase of 3.6% per year. So your contribution dollar amount, we don't let it go up more than 3.6% per year, just to see, again, how underfunding affects the plan. And then we take that one step further, instead of just the 2 percentage points below, we just take that 20% loss that we did earlier in the investment side. So we say the fund is going to lose 20%, and then see how collaring the contributions at 3.6% per year affects the contributions in the funded ratio. Finally, some upside ones. What if the budget found an extra $500 million or $1 billion to put into SERS? How does that impact things? That would be great news. Nobody would have a problem with that. But then that's going to end up, improving the funded ratio and bringing the contribution down over time. The cost of living, a lot of the cost of living analysis that we've looked at focuses on pre-Act 9. But for this purpose, we want to say, what if everybody was granted a COLA? And we said, what if everybody's granted a 13th check every year into the future? So it's roughly an 8.3% increase in their benefit, forever. And, it's going to cost somewhere, shy of $3 billion. But how does that impact the funded status of the plan and future contributions? And finally, an early retirement incentive. We're not showing the details of that this year. It's not as interesting because we just have a 1-year open window, and we say, what if a 30 and out applied instead of the current 35 and out? So if a member has 30 years of service and can retire unreduced in a 1-year window, what kind of retirements would you see, and how would that impact the plan? All right, now to the specific ones we're going to look at. We're going to look at the stochastic simulation from 2.4. We're going to look at the limited employer contribution, where there's the 20% loss in investments, and then the 3.6% collar on the contribution increases. And then finally, that 13th check COLA that I talked about. All right, so investment performance. I think it's, everybody here knows we have an assumption of 6.875%, but the investment return, there's a lot of volatility around that. You're probably not going to hit 6.875%. In any given year, you're going to be above, below, you may be well above, well below. The hope is that on, over the long term geometrically, you'll average out to 6.875%. So that's where we went to RBK and asked them for these 5,000 sets of 20-year returns. And then we put that together. So as I said before, on slide 15, we have the 95th percentile is very unfavorable returns. 5th percentile is very favorable returns. In that 25 to 75 percentile area is kind of that, 50% of your occurrences are expected to be in there. So that's kind of what we'll call maybe a more likely area to be in. At the 75th percentile, it's an unfavorable. That'll be a red line like Chris alluded to. At the 25th percentile, that'll be a favorable area, and that'll be a blue line. And the next page shows the impact of that. So the dashed line up top, that's the 95th percentile. So that's very unfavorable returns. And it's a very unlikely scenario, but still something interesting to see how the contribution gets up to, right around a little over 5 billion. So in 2040, and these are fiscal year ending contributions. So currently you're making 2.29 billion for the fiscal year July 1, 2025 through June 30, 2026. So for the period July 1, 2039 through July 1, 2040, that contribution at the 95th percentile would be $5.17 billion. So that's the peak. But what you see is that if you're making the contributions, you kind of hit that peak there, and then you're going to have some amortization payments dropping off, and then that contribution level is going to come down, even with the very unfavorable returns. At the 75th percentile, you hit a peak at that same year, the fiscal year ending 2040 at $4 billion. And if you happen to be in the favorable area, the blue area, you're going to hit your normal cost pretty quickly. So in that 5th percentile, where it's very unlikely, very favorable, right around 2033, you can see you're at a 0.5, then a 0.49, 0.5. The law requires you to make a normal cost contribution. So the fund is going to get at least the benefits that accrue during the year for the active membership. So if you're making investment returns well in excess of what's expected, you're likely to go down to what would have been a zero contribution previously. And that's when that floor kicks in and requires the normal cost be made. So a lot of these low numbers that are around 0.5 are what would be a normal cost contribution for those years. So you hit that pretty soon at the 5th percentile, and you also hit it you hit it out toward around 2043, 2042, 2043 for the 25th percentile. And the funded ratios on the next page, 17, they look great in those blue. So if you're at the 5th percentile, we're projecting 226% funded, which would be a great problem to have to deal with as an upside. But even at the 25th percentile, you're at 126% versus the baseline of, it's shown as 100%. It's actually 99.6. So it's just shy of being 100%, but rounded, it's very, very close, of course, to that 100% area. So in both of those cases, it's a great situation. But if you end up at the 75th percentile, that 50% range from 25 to 75%, you're at 67% and 46% at the 95th percentile. But what you can see, if you kind of look at the 75th percentile, when it gets down to 65, 64 in 2031 and 2022, it kind of stabilizes. It hits a low in 2034 of 63%. And then it starts its way back up. And again, that's kind of the advice of make the actuarially determined contributions. So when you hit these down periods, when certain risks, rear their ugly head, for lack of a better term, if you're making those contributions, that's what's going to allow you to weather the storm and kind of get to the other side and get out of it and get back toward, a well-funded position. All right, so next, 4.3. This is the one where the plan's going to lose 20% of its investments, and then the contribution is going to be collared at a 3.6% increase in each year. Again, this is not allowed by law. It's just meant for informational purposes. It's again to drive home that point. Make the contributions. So the table on 4.3 on the chart on page 19. Shows you kind of what happens in the dotted line. This is where we're limiting the contribution increase. So the baseline is the black line, and if the 20% loss happened then your contribution over 5 years, as that loss phased in through the smoothing method, you would see the cost go up, up, up in the solid red line. But instead, what we're saying is, if you choose a scenario where you're going to under contribute, then you're going to be, have a smaller dotted or dashed red line. And then ultimately you're going to go up over and you're going to end up paying more in the long term, because anything you underpay now, you're going to have to pay later with interest. So you're going to end up paying more in dollars later than what you would pay, if you paid it up front. All right. And same scenario, but just the funded ratio. So again, you can see if you're underfunding the plan in that limited funding scenario, the dashed line in 2039, you'll see it drops down to 72%. But by continuing to make the contribution, you do get back up to 81%, but that's still short of the 88% you would have been at had you made the ADC contributions after the 20% loss. All right, and the final scenario we're looking at is a COLA, cost of living increase, that all current retirees would get an 8.3%, 8.33%, which is about 1/12, a 13th check given to each retiree currently in pay status. And then we look at this two ways just to make it a little more interesting. But the solid line up top, it's kind of up. And then it stays, fairly flat and then drops. So that's the 10-year amortization. So if a COLA is granted by law, it's going to require a 10-year funding of that. So that we do an amortization payment that over 10 years, and that's where it gets paid off. So that's why you have that larger jump for 10 years and then kind of a reversion back to the baseline, because the entire amount is paid off at that time. What we did is we said, okay, what if you started that 10-year amortization and then a law was passed saying we're going to give you $3 billion to put in your fund right now? And how does that impact things? And probably what would happen is the amortization and the payment would be aligned. The amortization would be wiped out. But we're saying, what if that 10-year amortization still existed and the extra contribution flowed through? It would flow through the smoothing method immediately because it's a contribution. It's not a gain or loss on investments. And then it would get amortized over 30 years. So what we're looking at here is we're looking at a cost that's being funded over 10 years and a credit that's being funded over 30 years. Unlikely scenario, but it just kind of gives you a little different way of looking at it. So what it does is it produces, it's a higher cost than baseline initially. And then the 10-year cost is going to be more expensive if you're paying the amortization. Then that contribution coming in lowers that 10-year cost down to here, that middle dashed line. And then ultimately over time, because you paid a little more, you're going to see a savings in the future after that 10-year amortization period. So again, it's an unlikely scenario, but just kind of a different way of looking at things in a what if type situation. And then the final slide of the different scenarios here is the funded ratio. And in all of these situations, again, if the money's coming in, if you increase your liability and you add assets equal to that over a period of time, you're going to improve the funded status of the plan, because you have, you've added money to the numerator and the denominator. So it ends up leading to a situation where under the immediate funding, you're at 102% and you're still, at 100% or maybe a little more toward 2044 because you've added more in assets. And if you add, the same amount to the numerator and the denominator, it brings up your average just a little bit. All right, that was the end of that. Kind of the conclusion, and I've stated this a number of times, is make the contributions. If the ADC's contributed, it will make things much easier to handle in the future should you see a downside risk. There, on the report itself, where we do the liquidity and we look at the capital preservation measures that are in place, they are working well from what we can see. And should a situation arise where you need to liquidate assets, you would have a pool of assets that you could liquidate and avoid some of the unfavorable value, of some of the income that is not easily liquidated. And then finally, this is just to monitor things. This is kind of keeps you in tune to what could go wrong, and should we see any type of warning signs, then we can give you more information around it. But again, keep continuing to look at this on an annual basis does keep you aware of what's going on and allows us to work together to help remedy any situations that may arise. Any questions?
Thank you for your presentation. We need to move to accept the stress testing and risk management report. So I move that the Finance and Member and Participant Services Committee recommend that the State Employees Retirement Board approve the 2025 stress testing and risk assessment report prepared by SERS Actuary Gabriel Roeder Smith and Company, otherwise known as GRS. I move and need a second.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Sarah or Brenda, will you take the roll?
All right, Mr. Enders,
Aye.
Representative Frankel,
Aye.
Mr. Galeska,
Aye.
Ms. Buchanan for Senator Robinson,
Aye.
and Mr. Soderstedt for Secretary Spiker.
Aye.
Thank you, members. The unanimous vote to accept the report and move it to the board. In new business, we have the fiscal year 2026-2027 budget presentation. Sarah.
Thank you, Representative Frankel. The material is found in board docs under agenda item 6A. As Representative Frankel noted, I'll be presenting the fiscal year 26-27 budgets for our defined benefit plan, the administrative fund and the investment fund, the defined contribution plan, and the deferred compensation plan. SERS follows the Commonwealth's Governor's Budget Office, or GBO's, instructions. We abide by their timeline and we use their software when preparing and submitting our budgets. In alignment with GBO guidance, SERS evaluates our goals and services to enhance efficiency while maintaining our core responsibilities. And as just a reminder, the standalone internal audit office budgets were presented earlier in the day to the Audit Risk and Compliance Committee for review and approval. Those internal audit office amounts are included in the comprehensive SERS budgets being presented in this presentation. So if you could go to slide 3. On the defined benefit plan administrative fund, in total, we're anticipating a fiscal year 26-27 budget of $43.4 million, which is up just a fraction of a % over prior year. The personnel increase is mainly attributable to higher overall salaries, inclusive of general and step pay increases and the related associated cost of benefits. The increase is slightly offset by the impact of our filled vacant mix and a fewer number of pay periods being budgeted for vacant positions in the current year. The 26-27 submission are being budgeted for at 9, down from 13 in the prior year. The operating line items are down slightly. A large majority of our operating costs are related to IT-related expenses, including Commonwealth IT shared services, hardware, software, and related maintenance, IT subscriptions, cybersecurity, and the projected costs tied to the large multi-year board-approved pension administration system, or PAS, upgrade initiative. Beyond the IT area, we are anticipating inflationary impacts to the pricing for two of our major contracts, our financial statement audit contract, as well as our actuarial services contract, both of which are currently undergoing in the RFP process. If you go to the next slide, the investment fund for the defined benefit plan. The budget remains largely unchanged year over year at approximately $12.2 million. The budget is inclusive of various investment-related costs, such as salaries and benefits for our investment professionals, multiple consultant contracts, a modest amount of travel for the investment office, as well as costs related to the investment software and subscriptions. Before transitioning to the next couple of slides for the defined contribution and deferred comp plan, I just wanted to provide a reminder of current events that are impacting the operations of the plans. So following the competitive request for proposal RFP process, the board awarded Empower a new contract to administer both the defined contribution and deferred comp plans effective January 1st, 2025. The new contract, the arrangement under that contract, marked a shift from the previous model where PA Treasury acted as the cash custodian to an industry standard structure in which Empower as a TPA assumes custodial responsibilities. SERS and Empower worked in close coordination with PA Treasury, investment managers, and participating employers to ensure a smooth and successful transition at the beginning of this year. The updated model has delivered significant improvements, including enhanced operational efficiency, better participant services, faster access to participant funds, and approximately 35% in cost savings to deferred compensation plan participants and the defined contribution plan employers. So with that being said, on the defined contribution plan, we're anticipating a fiscal year 26-27 budget of $4.9 million, which is up just slightly 2% over the prior year's budget. On the personnel side, salaries and benefits did increase due to factors previously mentioned on the DB plan, but the total allocation to the DC plan has come down under the new model, which results in an approximately $100,000 decrease year over year. We continue to evaluate the level of personnel costs that need to be dedicated to the plan under the new model. Operational costs are primarily driven by the third-party administration fees. The new contract, effective January 1st, 2025, reflects a roughly 35% reduction in annual fees from $54.60 a year down to $36 a year, which is factored into both of the plans, the 26-27 budget on the left-hand side and the 25-26 budget on the right-hand side. So even though the cost per year per account went down, the continued growth in the plan account volume contributes to the rising overall cost of the plan in the far right-hand column. Overall, we estimate that 7,500 net new accounts are added to the plan, this mandatory plan, on an annual basis. However, this increase is partially offset by a substantial decrease in the investment consultants' expenses under the new RVK contract. If you go to slide 6, for the deferred comp. For deferred comp, we're anticipating an approximately $1.2 million budget, which is down slightly year over year. On the personnel side, salaries and benefits did increase due to factors previously mentioned, but the total allocation to the deferred comp plan has come down under the new model. Once again, we continue to evaluate the level of personnel costs that needs to be dedicated to this plan under the new model. The operational cost reduction is mainly driven by the substantial decrease in the investment consultant expenses under the new contract. So are there any questions on the budget?
Seeing none, I move that the Finance and Member and Participant Services Committee recommend that the State Employees Retirement Board approve for fiscal year 2026-27, the following proposed budgets. 1, SERS administrative budget of up to $43,406,000, inclusive of amounts separately approved by the Audit Risk and Compliance Committee, specifically for the Internal Audit Office. 2, SERS investment budget of up to $12,185,000, inclusive of amounts separately approved by the Audit Risk and Compliance Committee, specifically for the Internal Audit Office. 3, State Employees Defined Contribution Plan budget of $4,939,000, inclusive of amounts separately approved by the Audit Risk and Compliance Committee, specifically for the Internal Audit Office. And 4, the Commonwealth's Deferred Compensation Plan budget of $1.152 million, inclusive of the amounts separately approved by the Audit Risk and Compliance Committee, specifically for the Internal Audit Office. Each substantially in the same form as presented by the Chief Financial Officer's SERS fiscal year 2026-27 budget presentation, and each as amended and or ultimately approved by the Office of the Budget. I move that, and I need a second.
Second.
Thank you, Don. Brenda, can we have a roll call?
Sure. Mr. Enders?
Aye.
Representative Frankel?
Aye.
Mr. Galeska?
Aye.
Ms. Buchanan for Senator Robinson?
Aye.
And Mr. Soderstedt for Secretary Spiker?
Aye.
Thank you.
That's been moved and approved. And we're going to item number 7. We have several informational items that Brenda and our legal staff will go over.
Okay, thank you. All right, the first item I have, you may have read about or heard on the news an announcement on August 29th of this year regarding a settlement between Empower and the SEC. So the settlement involved the SEC's findings on how Empower disclosed some bonus compensation paid to certain representatives, specifically that some retirement plan advisors who had a discretionary bonus compensation component tied to managed account enrollments did not adequately disclose the potential conflict of interest. Empower provided disclosures, but the SEC determined that the disclosures were not sufficiently specific, and they characterized the omissions as negligent but not intentional misrepresentations. The SEC didn't find that any participants were harmed, and they did not raise any concerns with any of the recommendations that the Empower representatives made, or with the costs, the performance, the participant benefits, or any other features of Empower's managed account offerings. One thing that the SEC did point out, they wanted to acknowledge Empower's significant remediation efforts and that fact that they were very cooperative during the investigation. Empower is not admitting or denying any of the SEC's findings, but they did voluntarily eliminate the bonus component in January 2023, and they did remediate all of the issues that the SEC identified. So there's no action for SERS to take at this point, but approximately 560 SERS participants, or which is about 2.6% of all of our enrolled participants, are going to receive a nominal refund as part of the settlement. The way that refund is going to be calculated and the actual amounts to be refunded and the timing are to be determined, but they will occur as soon as it's administratively feasible, but not prior to the first quarter of next year. Does anyone have any questions about that, about the settlement? Oh, okay. All right, the next item I have is the 5-year actuarial experience study report, which is on tab 7B of board docs. So the highlights of the report were provided at our July 22nd Finance and Member and Participant Services Committee meeting. But does anyone have any questions on the report after having a chance to take a look at it? Okay. My next item, as we have spoken about before, the Finance and Member and Participant Services Committee is responsible for the third-party administrator and the actuary relationships, which we all know are very important to operations here at SERS. And you'll find our board consultant evaluation memo on tab 7C in board docs. So the memo highlights the work that they do, as well as recent events, which Sarah spoke to earlier, our transition of actuarial services to GRS, the awarding of the third-party administrator contract, as well as the change in the custodial relationship. And the memo indicates that they have both met our expectations over the last year. And the final item I have is our benefit and membership lists for May, June, and July. They're in tab 7D, and these lists, again, provide information on all of our new members, people who have been reinstated, all of our refunds, our regular, our early, our disability retirements, and then all of our death benefit payments. Does anyone have any questions on anything?
See, no, thank you, Brenda. That brings us to conclusion, but I entertain any comments or concerns or questions from any of our members before we adjourn. See none, I move that the Finance and Member and Participant Services Committee meeting be adjourned. I need a second.
Second.
Second. And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, members. We are adjourned.